Hello and welcome to Lumen Podcast, where we explore the light that leaders bring into the world through purpose, creativity, and connection, and we want to share it with you. Today's guest is someone who understands the power of words and relationships better than I would say most. John Corcoran's career has taken him through the worlds of law, business, writing, and now entrepreneurship in a different way. He's the co founder of Rise 25, a company that helps entrepreneurs turn conversations into real business growth. And he's also a host of the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where he's interviewed hundreds of successful leaders. John believes that relationships are the ultimate currency and that conversations are how we build them. And today we'll explore how stories, curiosities, and human connection can shape a career and a life. I am your host, Joaquin Cordero, and again, welcome. My dear John, so good to have you, my friend. Welcome.
Thank you. And that was like an amazing introduction. Thank you so much.
Of course. Well, I guess, you have worn so many different hats throughout your experience. A writer, a recovering lawyer, as you say, entrepreneur, a podcast host. Looking back to all that experience, what is the common thread that connects all these chapters of your life?
Well, for sure, it's what you alluded to in the introduction. It's relationships. They say that it's all about who you know. And when I was in high school, I was fascinated by that. I actually had parents who had lost their job a number of times, been displaced by technology. My dad had been laid off. My company and my family struggled. He was out of work for a long period of time. And it led me to study biographies and autobiographies of successful people. And what I found is that what was common amongst all of them is that they put a premium on relationships. They focused on how to build relationships with people that could help them to achieve their professional goals. And so that's something that I put in place for my life. And I wasn't the smartest kid in school. I wasn't the most successful. I didn't go to, the Harvards and things like that, but I've had some amazing opportunities from working in the White House during the Clinton years to speechwriter for a California governor to, working for, I've worked for both Steven Spielberg, not directly, but indirectly with, and Warren Buffett. So, I've had some amazing opportunities through my career. And so what I'm an advocate for now is helping people to do the same. And what we're doing here today is an amazing way of doing it in a modern way. We're creating some content, creating a podcast episode, and we're also getting to know each other better. And so I tell people all the time, you should start a podcast because it's the best thing you'll ever do for your life.
I love that realization, and probably I had not seen the relevance of it as of now that I've been speaking with you and learning from your journey. Because I would see it as something that would help spark that connection so that I could learn from others' experience and grow from that, and in the way as well serve others so that they can learn from that experience as well. But now that you put it, I think it is tremendous, the connections that you make and the friendships that you make and the deep that you go throughout conversations as well, sharing experiences of each other. We were introduced by a couple of friends. Shout out to Eduardo Montano and Mark Stockley from EO, both of them, these great organizations that we participate in. Tell me a little bit about how was your introduction to entrepreneurship?
Great question. So I had always been interested in entrepreneurship from a young age, but it took me a while to get there. I'd had opportunities along the way that just kind of led me down different rabbit holes or different routes. And so, during college, I interned in the White House speechwriting office during the Clinton years, which was an amazing opportunity. And then that led to getting a job as a writer in presidential letters and messages, which led to being a speechwriter for a governor of California. And pretty soon, I'm almost 10 years into my career and I hadn't started any companies. I was always thinking about it, but it wasn't until after I'd gone back to law school, worked for another law firm, and then I realized I could do this myself. And so I went out on my own, and my commute didn't even change because I rented an office upstairs from the law firm that I'd been working for before.
You wanted to keep it close.
Exactly, just one flight up. a different commute, but world of difference, because all of a sudden I control my destiny. All of a sudden, what I put in is what I get out of it. And so that is how I got started. Is I literally went from practicing law for a law firm that just didn't really have any mentorship, didn't have any guidance. I was kind of really left to my own devices. And I realized I could do this myself, but I could do it at a much lower price point. Around that time, this is about 12 years ago, like, professional services was undergoing a bit of a revolution. I'd worked for a law firm that I remember they spent $10,000 to build or to buy a computer that sat in a closet Monday through Friday, and it backed up all the files. And then on Friday, the managing partner would take it home with him in case the place burned down. And so he had all the backup, all this stuff, like real secure system, like some little
Wow.
like this like 70s era like tape system that backed up all this stuff. And then I started my law firm a couple years later, and I signed up for Dropbox, which was $10 a month. $10,000 versus $10 a month. And there were all this cloud software that was coming out. I didn't need to pay for expensive subscriptions. The law firm had like these books that they would spend. They had subscriptions, thousands of dollars a year for a row of books that were dusty on a shelf and no one used, or to get their name into a blurb in a book. There's just these ridiculous decisions. So I just kept my costs way lower, and I found that I could really take home a lot more money under this model. And so that's what got me started. And then very quickly, I realized, okay, I don't want to be trading hours for dollars for the rest of my life. And I want to actually build a business. I built a business, but it was so dependent on me. If I went on vacation, I wasn't making money. And I was just really the only, biller there. And so
Like self-employed in a way.
yeah, self-employed, but basically I'd made a job for myself, and so then that took me down the route of, okay, well, how do I get more exposure for myself? How do I build more thought leadership? How do I attract clients to me? Which led me down the route of online content generation. So blogging and podcasting. And then that led to a whole host of other opportunities from there.
I want to go a little bit to your experience in the Clinton years in the White House. Share a little bit of how you started working there and how you find yourself throughout it. I even hear that you were in a series that is called what's the name of the series that the actor was based
Yeah.
on you?
I wasn't in the series, but I was a partial inspiration, and people have said, for one of the characters in The West Wing. So I'll tell you the story. I'll tell you a story behind that. So I actually I'm from Los Angeles. That's where my family works. My dad actually growing up was an entertainment reporter and a movie critic. And so he interviewed all the celebrities. And after college, for a short period of time, I worked for DreamWorks in Hollywood. And I met a bunch of people that way. And I go back, and so I get a job at the White House. So first I interned during college in the speechwriting office, and then kept in touch with the speechwriters, and then found out about this job as a writer in presidential letters and messages. It's kind of like a second tier speechwriter. So I'm working there. This is around 1999. And someone that I knew from Hollywood, I was still in touch with, and she said that there was a guy who was working on a series that was about the White House and wanted to know, would I want to connect with this person? Well, it turns out it was the creator of The West Wing, and he had also done The American President, which was an amazing movie that I was a big fan of. And so I connected with him before The West Wing was on the air. And there's some risk involved in that. The press office didn't like it when rogue members of the employees were, talking to people outside. But I figured I'm not giving them any state secrets. My security clearance wasn't that high. So I just told him about what my life was like. And a number of different plot points actually ended up into the series. And so there was one episode. So I actually wrote this Thanksgiving proclamation. So the history of Thanksgiving is the reason why we celebrate Thanksgiving in the United States is because the president issues this proclamation. It's kind of like a formality now, but George Washington had issued one, Abraham Lincoln had issued one, and I'd written the one in 1999. And, I'm sitting down 23 years old in front of my computer, picturing George Washington with a quill pen writing it in the White House not too far away from me, and thinking, like, I can't believe the pressure here. Like, I want this to be significant. I want it to be really good. And the end product I was really proud of. I put a lot of effort into it. And they print them up on this like old paper. It looks like parchment. And one of the perks of being in the White House was you could mail them to anyone. So I mailed a copy of it to the creator of The West Wing, Aaron, and I said, "Here you go. Just thought you'd be interested in this." And I also told him some details about my life, some random details. And so flash forward, I did hear nothing from him. Flash forward a year later, I turn on the Thanksgiving episode of The West Wing, and the whole story, one of the storylines is about the writing of the Thanksgiving Proclamation. And it's the speechwriter running around the White House, because they're always running around in that episode, running around talking about the writing of the Thanksgiving Proclamation. And the whole episode, an hour later, you get to the very end, and the president's about to go out into the Rose Garden to formally read the Thanksgiving Proclamation, which doesn't happen in real life, but whatever, that's a minor detail. And he looks down at this piece of paper, and he reads the first line. He's got this big dramatic moment, reads the first line of the proclamation, and it's the exact same line that I'd written that was in that proclamation for the Thanksgiving Proclamation. And the person that was playing this character, the speechwriter who written it, was Rob Lowe. So, I like to say that kind of partial inspiration for Rob Lowe's character on The West Wing. At least that whole storyline was. So that was
For sure.
Yeah.
That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about the history that you had with podcasts. You were right there at the beginning. How did you know this is going to be a big thing? I mean, I'm catching up. I've been with my podcast for over 2.5 years, maybe 40 episodes. You've been here for a long time. Tell me a little bit of how you were curious about the podcast movement.
The truth is, I don't think I knew that it would be as big as it is now. I didn't know that it would be something that would become so mainstream that celebrities and presidents and CEOs and investors and venture capitalists would be starting podcasts that would be so culturally relevant. But at the time, it just interested me. And when I started, it wasn't even really called podcasting. It was just I would interview people like this and record it and then publish it onto my blog, not even on a podcast feed. And I just like talking to people. I liked the fact that it opened doors for me to have a conversation with people. And one of my first real victories with it was I had a great client who came to me. It turns out he was a serial entrepreneur. He'd started businesses that had gone public, started a bunch of companies all over the globe. Really interesting guy, but he'd hired me for a tiny little legal matter. And after I was done with that tiny little legal matter, I'm thinking, like, how can I get this guy to be a regular client? I want to do more work for him, but I don't know how to do that. So kind of on a whim, I was just like, hey, I'd love to interview you on this episode. It won't take much time. We'll do it over video Skype. And he did it. And so we had this conversation. It was great. After it was over, he turned to me and he's like, hey, that was really a lot of fun. You know what? I think I have some other legal projects that you could do for me. And it was like a light bulb moment for me. It was like, oh, this is amazing. I can have a conversation with someone I respect and admire. They're super busy, but they'll give me time of day. They'll give me a little time to do an interview because I'm publishing it. I'm giving them promotion. And it just seemed like a great, synthesis of the things that I like to do and also getting good results from it. And so that's why I've been doing it ever since. And it's become much more mainstream than I ever thought it would be. And I really enjoy doing it because there's no end to the people that you can talk to, and there's no end to the stories that you can hear from people. So if you just take a natural curiosity towards people, then, you won't tire of doing it. And the other thing is that you have to compare it to everything else that you do for business development for your business. So that might be going to conferences, it might be going to lunch with people, it might be going to coffee with people, it might be cold email outreach or phone calls or whatever. There's all these different things that people do in the name of business and business development. And when you compare it to all of those other things, you realize that those things are really time consuming. It takes a lot of time to go off to a conference. It takes a lot of time to go drive across town and meet someone with coffee, for coffee, if you even can. Most of my clients now don't live and I live in San Francisco. They don't even live in San Francisco. They live all over the world. And so I can't even meet them for coffee. So when you compare it to those things, you realize it actually is less time consuming. It takes less time, less energy, and it gets you access to higher caliber people. I mean, I've got a stack of, from Vern Harnish, the creator of EO. I've interviewed him twice. Eric Ries, the author of The Lean Startup, this iconic book that has a huge impact on Silicon Valley. I've interviewed him. And Michael Gerber, The E-Myth, iconic book, interviewed all these people. So you get access to these people, co-founder of Netflix. You get access to these people that you never get access to otherwise. And you can ask them questions that you're curious about and that will lead to growth for you personally. If you're stuck in your business on something, go invite one of the world's expert and authorities on that thing and ask them questions that you're curious about. And whether 10 people listen to it or 10,000 people listen to it, it's a win for you personally. And so I just tell people, just take that approach to it and it'll be a super good use of your time.
That's awesome. And after the years that you've been hosting your own show, what's been like a really unexpected or very memorable moment that you've had from an interview?
Well, I think of one where this is an early one. This was actually a speaker. So you and I connected at a recent EO conference that I don't want to mention who the speaker is, but he was on stage at that EO conference this past spring that you and I were both at, that you spoke at. You gave a great speech. One of the other speakers there I interviewed very early days of my podcast. And I was doing it under video Skype, but this person asked me at the beginning, are we publishing the video? And I was like, oh, no, we're not publishing the video, just the audio. So apparently he took that to heart. And so I'm doing the interview, and I try and connect with people. The reason I do video is because I want to connect with people. Make eye contact, and I want them to see me. So if I want to interject something, they naturally see like I'm trying to interject, right?
Yeah.
But this person does the interview, and he's like pacing back and forth, going all over. And like he's off camera the whole time. He's got like a walkable, microphone or something. I'm like, what the hell is going on here? Just dude walking back and forth. Finally, near the end of the interview, he just puts his feet up on the desk. And so the camera is just like his feet.
No way.
And so I'm interviewing like his feet the rest of the time. I'm just like, oh my God. Okay, I'm never telling someone I'm not using the video ever again. So that's one that comes to mind.
Oh, that was so funny and weird. How about scaling the business? Because some people, they don't, like you mentioned at one point that they didn't get to the 10th podcast, and it is a great win to be able to continue doing it and maintaining it. Where I'm from in Guatemala, there's not a lot of podcasts, but there's already around 20 or so that I know of, and some are really good and learn from all of them. But how do you think one goes to being able to scale the podcast to be able to reach more people? Is it a lot of investment, which would be the obvious? Is it doing certain hacks that might be helpful? I would assume that video is easier than audio because there's more to enjoy than just audio. What are other little things that you could share us?
Well, video is helpful. The majority of podcasts these days also do video. And if you're going to do a podcast, you might as well record video as well, because then you have a lot more assets you can utilize. And YouTube is the #2 search engine after Google. So you might as well take that content and put it up onto YouTube. But I say do your podcast for you. Do it because it's going to be valuable to you. Be selfish about it. So whatever you're focused on in your business, maybe you're focused in your business on improving your sales process or improving your client onboarding or improving your SEO. Whatever you're focused on, use the podcast selfishly, because a lot of people have this like idea of like this mythical audience. I need to do this for the audience, or they get stuck into a rut of I need to interview this type of person. I can't interview other types of people. And then they have these like major challenges in their business, but their podcast is over here. And the podcast, the people that they're interviewing is not helping them with the biggest challenge that they have in their business. And so they end up giving up on it. They end up quitting the podcast because the podcast isn't helping with the biggest challenges that they have. Whereas like the podcast, frankly, is an unfair advantage. I've had clients before, they're like, oh, you know what? Oh, I'm so frustrated right now. My head of sales just quit. I don't know what I'm going to do. We're totally screwed. I'm like, great. Let's use this podcast to help you with that challenge. Guess what we did? He interviewed Jack Daly. Jack Daly is one of the world's foremost experts on sales. And guess what? Not only did he get to ask questions in a podcast episode that he was curious about that helped him to revamp his sales process, but Jack then spent another hour afterwards on the phone with him just in gratitude, just thankful for him interviewing him, giving him all kinds of advice and tips and resources and things like that. And that's happened so many times for me that the podcast is one thing, but the relationship with the guest is a whole nother thing. The guest may give you advice. They may give you a free ticket to their conference. They may give you access to their software. They may give you an introduction to someone in their network that is priceless. And those things are far more valuable, again, whether 10 people listen to it or 10,000 people listen to it. Now, there's lots of stuff you can do to expand your audience, but frankly, I think the podcast should be useful whether you expand your audience or not. But expanding your audience, sure. If you have an unlimited budget, there's lots of things you can do. You can buy people listening. You buy subscribers. You can buy views and things like that. But that won't guarantee that it's useful to you. So I've seen lots of people that do those things. They spend tons of money to buy views, subscribers, audience, stuff like that. But they haven't figured out how does the podcast actually benefit them. And so eventually they end up giving up anyways. I met a guy a number of years ago that was looking for advice from me on how he could improve his podcast. And he had gotten millions of listeners. Great, wonderful. I'm super happy for you. But you know what his job was? His full-time job was working in an Apple store. And what that told me is that he'd figured out audience. He'd not figured out how can this podcast benefit me because he hadn't been able to quit his day job. So I say figure out first, what does the podcast do for you? How are you utilizing it? How is it useful to you? Do you want to grow your business in this direction? Maybe there's a particular vertical or a type of client that you're not serving right now or you want to serve more of. So how are you going to use that podcast to network your way into that field, to connect with the thought leaders, the experts, the authorities, the potential clients, the referral partners in that vertical that you want to go into? That's just one example, right? But you have to do that kind of foundational thought to think about what you want to use the podcast. So the podcast is your unfair advantage that will help you to move the business in the direction that you want it to go, regardless of whether there are tons of people listening to it or not. And then you can always work on, depending on what your budget is, you could always put more resources into growing audience later.
Nice. I love that. I love the intentionality behind it because it's clear, very clear, and that brings the question of regarding content or people who you interview. Do you have like a policy that you only want to focus on certain things, or is it open? Is it the different walks of life, or how has that been your experience shaping Rise 25?
In my experience, it evolves over time and it will change over time depending on where your business is. And again, we're not talking about entertainment podcasts, we're talking about business podcasts. But your interests change over time and your needs change over time. Like your business might need something now and it might need something different 6 months from now. So it's helpful to brainstorm a list of who are ideal guests, but it's also helpful to look for opportunities. Like our mutual friend Eduardo Montano, right? I interviewed him and we talked about his book, The Family Forum. And there's a business connection to it, but there's also a personal connection to it too. I've got 4 kids. I care about how I'm raising those kids. You've got a daughter. You care about how you're raising your daughter. And, this was someone that I think I'd seen something that Eduardo had posted in one of the various different EO subgroups. And he just said something that really resonated with me. And how that happens all the time. You see something online, you see someone says something, and you're like, oh, wow, that's really interesting. I want to know more about it. Well, the podcast gives you that tool to get to know that person and to ask more questions. So whatever it was he posted, I don't even remember what it was. It was something about raising kids or family meetings or something like that. I sent him a message and I was like, hey, Eduardo, that sounds amazing. I'd love to know more about your book. I'd love to have you come on the podcast. Let's talk about the book. And, that's like catnip. Usually people are like, oh, yeah, you don't need to ask me twice, And what results from that? One, we get to have a great conversation. I get ideas that from the book that maybe I wouldn't even get from just the book. I'm talking to the author of the book. I can take those back to my family. We're creating content that puts good will out into the universe. And he even became a client of my company. Now, that doesn't happen every time. I'm not going to say that every single time you interview someone, that person's going to become a client of yours. Sometimes I become a client of theirs. Sometimes I interview someone that I'm thinking about hiring. Maybe it's a business coach. Maybe it's a consultant. Maybe it's an agency owner. And then sometimes I end up hiring them. So it's a great way to vet someone, to figure out, is this someone that I want to work with? So to answer your question, how do I decide? You get into rhythms of certain types of guests that you like to have on. I've been a member of Entrepreneurs Organization. I've been in the community for about 8 years now, been a member of EO for 4.5 years now, very active and involved in the community. I know that it is a community that fills me up, fills my bucket. I absolutely love being a part of it. Every time I interview someone from EO, I get ideas out of it. We build another connection and I've made another friend. And so I interview a lot of people in that community. But for those who are listening to this, maybe there's a community that you belong to where you should be doing the same, where you can get more out of the organizations that you belong to by interviewing other members of that organization. It's good for that organization. It increases their visibility, and it also helps you to get more out of your membership in that organization. So it's evolved and changed for me over time, and I'm always like thinking through like, oh, who's a new person? But that's kind of my approach to it.
Nice. What are podcasts that you watch? Can you share some of the ones that you learn from or that you are intrigued about or curious and like to follow?
Oh, absolutely, and I'm gonna bring up my Spotify so in case I forget some of them. Well, I've been very interested in, AI recently, so I listen to a lot of different podcasts. So the Hard Fork podcast from the New York Times, Moonshots podcast with Peter Diamandis, who I've had on my podcast before, artificial intelligence show, the A16Z podcast, which is, Andreessen Horowitz venture capital firm is another one that I've been listening to. That's a few of them there. I mean, I'm constantly downloading different episodes and checking out different episodes because I like to check out what different shows are doing. We've got a client named Todd Taskey, Potomac Business Capital. He's a M&A advisor for agencies. He's got a great podcast called The Second Bite Podcast that I listen to his episodes. Built to Sell. I think I've got the book is behind me here somewhere. John Warlow is the author of the book Built to Sell, and he was a client of ours for a number of years. And he has episodes that are about people that have sold a business and going through the process of selling that business and unpacking that. I love those episodes; those are really good. That's a number of them there.
That's awesome. You talk about being intentional with your relationships. What does that look like in practice?
Well, I'll give you one tip. So, my business partner, Jeremy, Inspired Insider Show, is really good at this. So he will take a list of our best referral partners and he writes them down on a little Post-it note and puts them on his computer close to where the computer monitor is, where the camera is. And the reason he does that is because he wants to look at ways that he can work them into the conversation. So you saw a moment ago, I mentioned some of, our clients. I mentioned some of our referral partners. And after I'm done with this episode, I can send a message to Eduardo. Hey, Eduardo, Queenie, who you introduced me to, just introduced me for the podcast. We talked about you on the episode. I mentioned your business, your book. Go check it out. So that is being intentional about people that matter to you, because a podcast is a great way for two people to build a relationship, but you can also build and deepen more relationships by bringing them into the conversation and letting them know too, because they might not always hear about it. They're not going to hear every episode that goes out there. So Jeremy, my business partner, puts the Post-it note up there with our biggest referral partners so he doesn't forget to mention them. And if it's relevant, if there's an opportunity for him to mention them in the context of an interview, either he's doing for his own show or being a guest on someone else's show, he will bring them up. He'll mention them in the conversation. And then after it's over, he'll get on his phone, he'll send them a text message, send them a WhatsApp message, send them an email, whatever, say, hey, Bill, just want to let you know, I just was on a podcast episode. They asked me who's someone that I really admire and respect the work that they're doing. I mentioned you. Just want to let you know. Go check out the episode when it comes out. Look, those are little things that you can do. But if you're doing that for your biggest referral partners, your biggest strategic partners, your most important clients, these are just like little touches that you can do that are magnifying the impact of any one episode that you do. Because instead of just one relationship getting moved further along and deepening one relationship, you are actually moving the ball down the road, so to speak, with multiple relationships.
Nice. That's a great technique. I didn't know it. And for those who are starting, for example, I remember when I was going to start with the podcast, and sometimes I don't know if you experience that, but you kind of like want to make your first one like kind of like amazing, and sometimes it's just getting ahead of it and doing 40 more or whatever. What would you recommend to those who are thinking it?
Well, everyone overthinks it. It's kind of like I think there's a Chinese proverb about planting a tree. The best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago. The second best time is now. So you can bemoan the fact that, oh, I should have started a podcast a long time ago and I didn't, or you can just get started now and you can, try and make it perfect. And a lot of times what ends up happening is people just don't do it for very long. I remember I met a guy a while back who had done one episode of his podcast about 2 years earlier. One episode. I asked him how many hours went into that first episode. He said about 100 hours of his time. No wonder he didn't do a second one, because he was way too perfectionist about it and had just like this idea in his mind that it needed to be perfect. And a lot of people do that. They put this standard, the same standard perfection that they hold themselves to for the client work that they do, they apply to the podcast. And that is a mistake. It's a mistake that I had to learn because I was a lawyer practicing law, and you pay lawyers to have attention to detail, to watch very closely, to cross the T's, to dot the I's, to make sure everything's perfect. And so I thought that was the standard I needed to hold myself to with the podcast. And it wasn't until I let go of that. It wasn't until I realized I can't be like proofing every single show notes. What I should be doing is I should be using the podcast to maximize the number of relationships that I build and then delegate all the rest. And then once I did that, I let go of that perfectionist. Then I produced a lot more episodes. So that was what I would say to people is, one, just get started. And two, don't worry about it being perfect. It's going to be messy in the beginning. You're going to struggle. You're going to lose your chain of thought. You're going to struggle to come up with a question to ask the guest. You can also start with friends. Like, instead of don't go out and interview like the biggest icon in your industry first. Interview your friends, your peers, your contemporaries, people that you know and trust, people that aren't going to worry, or you're not going to be embarrassed if you screw it up. Start with them first. And don't worry about it not being perfect. And, it takes repetition. Do 10, 20, 30, and then start reaching out to your clients, interviewing your clients, not your biggest one first, the smaller ones first, right? And work your way up to the bigger ones. And like anything, you get better at it over time, and every other skill in life, it takes a while to get better at it. And as you do more of it, it'll really improve. And, I'm a better speaker on stage because I've done a ton of podcasts. I'm a better communicator. I learn more. It's personal and professional development. It's all of those things. So just, getting started and putting in the repetition.
When you consume podcasts, do you listen them in normal speed? Do you put like 1.10, 1.20?
Oh, I am a 1.5 guy most of the time. 1.5, yeah.
Oh, wow,
My
that's
wife thinks it's
fast.
crazy. She's like, I don't understand how you do that. But once you do it, can't go back. You certainly can't.
Cortisol levels must be like high and everything.
Yeah, I mean, Jeremy, my business partner, he does like 2 or 2.5 or something. I don't understand how he can understand that stuff. I don't get that. But it depends. If someone talks really fast, then I'll slow it down. That just happened. Like I was doing 1.2 because they were talking really fast. So
Wow. And another question: Do you do live ones as well, or mostly all pre-recorded?
I've experimented with that in the past. I've done live ones in the past, not live like in person on site. Although I take it back. We have done that before. We had We had a project with the client that was a 17,000 person conference in Chicago, this massive conference. And the conference itself, who we actually connected with through a podcast, hired us to come in with a live video crew. They built this whole like big glass booth. It was like the Today Show, and we brought in guests and we interviewed them. Now we had a whole crew there, so we didn't have to worry about that, but we were live streaming it the whole time. That's very complicated, requires a really large budget. Don't do that sort of thing. I have also done things like LinkedIn Lives as well, where you can just stream it like what we're doing right here, but streaming it to LinkedIn Live. I did that for a while, and I just felt like the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. It wasn't worth the worry about it because you had to schedule it for a particular date and time, and then you're worrying, is the guest going to show up? What if they don't show up? And there just wasn't that many people showing up to watch them. LinkedIn used to promote these things a lot more, and then I think they just lost interest in it as a product, and so I just kind of gave up on it. So now I just record them. That's it, and I prefer to do it that way. But there's some people that prefer to do it live. That's fine too.
And in your company, does any size of podcast can come to you for? I would believe the answer is so, but there's podcasts that are starting between 0 to 50, others that are between 50 to 100 podcasts that have done, or some maybe older. Do you service every size of type of company that does podcasts?
Oh yeah. We've had everything from very small companies, although usually it's not like a solopreneur who has no employees. Like our ideal client is larger than that. They actually have a team. They're beyond the accelerator size, and so usually it's a larger company, all the way up to like divisions of Berkshire Hathaway, multi-billion-dollar unicorn companies that we worked with as well. So every different size.
Nice. One last question, technical questions for podcasts. Servicing myself on these ones. Thank you, my friend. With language, I sometimes do in Spanish and sometimes do in English. And I put them on the same track, like in Spotify or in YouTube or wherever. Do you have any recommendations on that? Should I separate them, have the Spanish ones here and English over there?
To answer your question, what it gets to is how people consume podcasts. And so, if you look inside of your podcast feed, people will, they're driving, they're like, oh, I'll listen to a podcast, or they're walking the dog, oh, I'll listen to a podcast. And then they go and they look and they're like, oh, maybe I'll listen to this, maybe not that, maybe this, maybe not that. So, and there are feeds of like multiple different podcasts in there. So they pick and choose. So it's not that big a deal if you have both English and Spanish one. If first of all, probably a lot of your listeners are bilingual like you. So maybe they'd listen to it in Spanish. Maybe they'd also listen to it in English. So maybe that doesn't even stop them. There might be some people who will only speak English, or they only speak Spanish, so they'll only listen to those episodes. They'll just skip over the ones that, oh, that's in Spanish, I'll skip it. Oh, that one's fine. But very rarely do people start at the beginning of a podcast and listen all the way through all of the episodes. And even if they did, they would just skip over the ones that are in a language that they don't understand. So I don't think it's that big a deal at all.
And it wouldn't affect the rhythm either. That would be good.
Yeah.
What is something that you're passionate about other than podcasts? Something where you try to put your mind at ease, sports or anything like leisure?
Yeah, well, most of my leisure is following kids around to various different sports games: soccer, baseball, basketball, football, cross country, you name it. That's most of what I do. My weekends are filled with. When I do get a chance to do something, biking is a big one, cycling. So I made one of the best decisions of my life was I was commuting 45 minutes or something like that for no particular reason to an office that was way farther away from my house. And when my oldest got to kindergarten, I moved my office to about, actually it's the only office building that is closest to my son's school at the time. And I could bike to work. And so for 10 years now, I biked to work about 2.5 miles one way. And it's relatively flat. It's mostly a separated bike lane. It's super safe. And I biked my kids also to school, 4 kids now. And it's the best decision I ever made. Absolutely love it. getting on a bike in the morning and going a couple miles takes 15 minutes or something like that, and then getting on a bike in the evening, going home. You know, I before I made that decision, I thought back in my life, really did like kind of a reflection of my life, and I realized that in college, the college that I went to had a lot of bikes there, and I rode bikes every day to class and whatnot. And there's a lot of reasons why I was happy in college. I don't think biking was the only reason.
But it was one of them.
It was one of them. I was not getting into a car every day. I was biking, you move your body just like you do with rock climbing, right? You move your body and you kind of get things out of your system and stuff. And so I've been doing it now for 10 years, and I that just refreshes me each day, and I'm really glad that I made that decision.
Nice. What are 2 or 3 books that you could recommend?
Well, I got a stack of them here. So, The Family Forum by Eduardo Montano, that's a great one. This is one that we actually were involved in. So, Michael E. Gerber and Austin Clark, The E-Myth for Pest Control Businesses, for those who are in the pest control space. Eric Reese has got The Lean Startup. Really cool EO story, real quick. He came and spoke to our chapter recently, and he's got a new book that's coming out that's not out yet. And our chapter was the first group of people that he came to talk about that book and give an exclusive behind the scenes preview. Really super cool that we had that opportunity. Vern Harnish, of course, Scaling Up, a classic. Here's an older one. How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, classic. If you haven't read this, you got to read it. I had my 15-year-old read it. I mandated him to read it. And I joke that this book, which was published in 1913, that it was written about podcasting, because podcasting is about how you make someone feel. And Quinny, you made me feel this is the highlight of my day. I get to talk about myself. Who doesn't love talking about themselves, right? And so when you make people feel great, as Dale Carnegie wrote about over 100 years ago, then they want to repay the favor. So after this is over, I'm thinking, oh, this is so nice of Quinny to have me on. Like, what can I do? How can I help him? How can I repay the favor to him? And that's what will happen if you have a podcast, is that you have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 people over the course of a year that are like, oh, that was so great. I really enjoyed that conversation. He asked me questions that my wife doesn't care about. He asked me questions that my friends aren't interested in. And I got to talk about myself, and I love doing that. And so that is a reason why this book is always.
It's one of my favorites. I am amazed about that book. One of the great takeaways that I had from it, like it was mind exploding, was, what do you prefer to have? Do you prefer to be right, or do you prefer to have friends? Sometimes conversation get heated and you're like, what am I defending? Like, why do I have to have the need to be right? I prefer to conserve our friendship. But it's a really, really good book. Thank you for sharing it. And coming to the end of our interview, my friend, if you could deliver one message to the next generation of creators and entrepreneurs, what would it be?
Well, I guess along the lines of what we're talking about here today, I would say think about how you can combine what you do, um, combine what you do professionally with building greater relationships. And so what I'd been doing before when I was an attorney practicing law is I was going to coffee and lunch with people, and that was okay. You build relationships with people one-on-one, but what I found was that it took me even less time to have conversations with people over Zoom. I didn't have to drive across town to meet people, and we were creating resources that shared the wisdom of the person I was talking to with the world. And that these resources would be up on the web for as long as the web is around. And so I'm building better relationships, using my time more efficiently with people that I wouldn't otherwise get access to, people like the co-founder of Netflix or Kinko's or YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard, things like that, people that I would not otherwise have the chance to talk to. And we're putting good work out into the world. And also, by the way, I'm getting a chance for them to get to know me and get to know who I am and what services I provide. And maybe we'll do business together. Maybe I'll hire them. Maybe they'll hire me. Some of these things will happen naturally. So look for opportunities like that. It could be interviewing people and publishing them on YouTube. It could be interviewing people and publishing them on Spotify. It doesn't take much more time. Actually, I think it takes less time than what you might be doing otherwise for the purpose of moving your career forward, moving your business forward. So that's the idea I would leave people with is look into those opportunities.
Nice. John, thank you for joining us. Your journey reminds us that behind every great opportunity is a single intentional conversation, and that storytelling, when done with authenticity, can create connections that last for a lifetime. For everyone listening, check out John's work at risk25.com and the Smart Business Revolution podcast. I am Joaquin Cordero, and this is Lumen, where stories light the way. Please share this episode with your friend who wants to start a podcast or your friend who is a podcaster. All right, hasta la próxima.